enjoy roots, rock, and reggae, you're in for a special treat. Tampa's Tribal Style is bringing their unique Jamaican flavor to the Cuban Club at this year's Tropical Heat Wave. Led by the Ten Brothers, the group has been together for more than 11 years and have blazed a trail as Tampa's premier world beat reggae band. Tribal Style has played all over the country, opening for acts such as Ziggy Marley, Toots and the Maytals, Sublime, and No Doubt. Here's your chance to catch them live at WMNF's Tropical Heat Wave, Saturday, May 10th at the historic Cuban Club in Ybor City. Tickets are $50 in advance, $60 at the door. Go to WMNF.org for more info and to purchase tickets.
Welcome to Tuesday Cafe. I'm Sean Canan. Today we're going to hear a special program. It's about talking across the political divide. This show is from American Public Media, APM, and it's called Americans Reconnect. You can email me at dj@wmnf.org and let me know what you think.
From APM, this is Americans Reconnect, talking across the political divide. Our country is deeply divided. Families and communities are suffering big blow-ups over politics. But that's not the whole story. This hour, you'll hear everyday people who are having tough conversations about politics and social issues and succeeding. They're doing it in their families.
Working through this with Robin, I came to embrace it, that this is who Robin is.
And they're having important conversations in their communities.
This conflict, no one's going to win. I think the only way through is together.
People might say that's really naive, but I also think that, this is how movements work.
Coming up, we'll hear stories that help us understand the political moment we're in and how to find our way through it. I'm Nina Moini. Stay with us. From APM, this is Americans Reconnect, talking across the political divide. I'm your host, Nina Moini. This hour, we bring you stories that help us understand the political moment we're in and how to find our way through it. You'll hear from Americans who are trying to have hard political conversations and succeeding. Some are trying to keep family relationships alive, like two cousins who grew up in devout Catholic families in Pennsylvania. They've had to navigate their differing views on abortion.
I'm sure there could have been plenty of other people in our family that could have blew up Christmas and it be ruined. But, Kayla and I have a relationship that's not built on that.
Others hope that bridging divides can lead to bigger societal changes. We'll hear from a group of Minneapolis police officers and Black community members who traveled together to Alabama. The goal? To spend time together learning about slavery and the civil rights movement.
We can't cover it up, we can't ignore it, and the best way to heal some of those wounds is just simply to acknowledge it, and you have to just accept it, that it happened and it was wrong. And so this helps connect a lot of dots in my head and helps me to serve the community.
Make no mistake, this kind of work is seldom easy, especially around contentious topics like the conflict between Israelis and Palestinians.
So in some ways, I think that the work we're doing is in that spirit of not staying silent and coming together when really society is encouraging us to remain in our little insular communities.
We'll hear from a UC Berkeley expert on why it's important to talk to people we don't agree with.
Research suggests that when you really bridge with someone, the possibility of them changing and your changing goes up exponentially. So it's actually much more effective in terms of moving people.
We start with the story of a father and son and a disagreement over politics. The two men supported different candidates in the last couple presidential elections. Their political differences were driving a wedge between them, so they sought help from a therapist. Reporter Catherine Richard has the story.
You're about to eavesdrop on an intimate conversation between a father and son and a therapist they've tapped to help them work through some issues.
And so what happens when the two of you talk about politics?
How would you answer that, Dad?
I would answer it does
stands sort of as a wall, and you can go around this side of the wall and talk. You can go around this side of the wall and talk. But when you're on opposite sides of that wall, it's like, let's just be happy that we're protected by the wall.
The dad, Andre Latendresse, is 74 and conservative. He lives just a few minutes away from his son, and by many measures, they're very close.
I have to say to this day, and I truly mean it, that this guy sitting next to me here, I love him with all my heart, and I am so proud of him. And I tell people that he's the most amazing person I've ever met.
Andre voted for President Donald Trump twice, though he was initially a never-Trumper. His son, Chris, is in his 40s and is a Democrat. He loves his dad dearly, but can't understand why he changed his mind about Trump. Chris hasn't felt comfortable asking.
It often feels like there's places in our relationship where we can't talk about things that deeply matter to us out of a fear of running into a landmine. And I don't want that to be true for the time that we have together.
The guy they've come to for help is Bill Doherty. He's not only a marriage and family therapist, he's also co-founder of a national organization that works to bridge political divides. It's called Braver Angels. Bill helped launch Braver Angels in 2016, and he says polarization has only gotten worse since then.
When we started out, we had to convince some people there was a problem. Now everybody knows there's a problem. The bad news is that the problem is worse. And that the polarization is deeper, the divide is wider. Now I'm hearing more than I did before about people divorcing over who they voted for, family cutoffs, a young man saying to his parents, "You're no longer my parents."
Bill is trying to help people overcome these dynamics. He says the stakes are high.
Well, if we can't talk about our common life, our public affairs, we lose our democracy.
One of Bill Doherty's first questions to Chris and Andre is about how the rift between them started. Andre says it dates back to when Chris moved to Washington, D.C. and eventually worked for the Obama administration.
We had at least one or more encounters where I was quite surprised that he was in a place so different from me.
He had become more liberal?
Yeah, quite a bit.
Yeah, okay.
As they talk with Bill, it quickly becomes clear both father and son have been harboring some resentments. Chris recalls the time his dad said he had been brainwashed by liberal Christian thinkers.
Like, really? They're brainwashing me at a Christian college?
And Andre remembers feeling insulted when Chris made a snarky remark about a book he was reading.
His statement was, "He's a bad historian. You shouldn't be reading that book."
Bill coaches them on how to navigate those moments.
So my recommendation is stay in the curious zone. You sort of went out of it a little bit there afterwards and said, well, I think we're both strong, so stay in the zone.
They spend more than 30 minutes rehashing old slights. There's no mention of President Donald Trump. But Bill says all the interpersonal stuff is relevant to the way Andre and Chris relate to each other when it comes to politics. Eventually, the conversation does turn to Trump. Chris struggles to pose a question to his dad in a non-judgmental way.
Just as a practical point, here's what I'm struggling with a little bit. I feel like the most open-minded, open-hearted, curious approach to that question would be to look my dad in the eyes and say, how did you come to voting for Trump for a second time? What I want to do is launch into a big preamble of how is it possible that as an American, as a Christian, can I...
Well, you're not going to do it here, though.
No. But
you feel like it.
Yeah, he's talking about this is how he wants
to. That's how you feel.
Bill interrupts Chris. Going on the attack isn't helpful, and Chris knows this. After a few minutes, he asks a more neutral question, and his dad explains that he came to see some of Trump's more outrageous statements as kind of an act.
As I observed Trump over time, I realized that he had a persona, something he puts on.
Andre goes on to reveal something he says he hasn't really discussed openly before.
I will go to my grave believing the 2020 election was stolen.
The father and son reflect back on what they hear each other saying, and the conversation ends amicably. For Chris, the conversation with his dad and the therapist was revelatory, especially the part where his dad said the 2020 election was stolen, a claim rejected by dozens of judges across the political spectrum.
Had he shared that with me, with Bill not sitting there, I probably would have immediately launched into how could you possibly believe that without any interest in his response. I can at least enter a space where I say, gosh, if I believed that to be true, how might that affect my politics?
But that was last November, before Trump took office, and before he issued dozens of executive orders. Given the big changes, we wanted to know if the Latendreses were still talking about their political disagreements.
Guys, what are you up to? What are you playing?
On a recent afternoon at Chris Latendres' house, his young sons were at war playing Minecraft.
We're making a war and we're going to play against each other.
Meanwhile, Chris and his dad, Andre, were chatting about the news, and it wasn't going off the rails. They say the therapy session had made it possible for them to talk about politics.
Obviously, I think it did crack a door open for us or give us a path around the wall to meet at some clearing.
It's safe to talk about. We can talk about it safely.
Chris says he's felt comfortable telling his dad when Trump's actions upset him. For example, he was dismayed to read that the Trump administration was considering scaling back federal housing programs. Chris runs a nonprofit focused on affordable housing.
On March 6th, I texted my dad. Altogether, what this adds up to is an administration that is dismantling brick by brick nearly everything your son has given his life's work to. And my dad, to his credit, responded, "I'm grieved if this is true."
Andre is trying to take a wait-and-see approach, but admits he's concerned about some of the decisions made so far, and he doesn't know what to make of Elon Musk having so much power in the government.
How do I find out what core values he has? Also, he's doing all this stuff, but someone else, I'm going to imagine, is going to start making decisions about what to do with what he's uncovering. And that's maybe sure be nice to know a little more about how those decisions are going to get made. Probably if there's a huge scary part for me, that would be the scary part.
Andre and Chris still see the world very differently, but they say they're committed to staying in a relationship and having honest conversations. Chris says he remains deeply alarmed by the direction of the country, but he also thinks talking respectfully about even the deepest disagreements is more important now than ever.
That's Catherine Richard. She spent the last year reporting on polarization and how to overcome it through a project called Talking Sense. This is Americans Reconnect, talking across the political divide. I'm Nina Moyni. The therapist we just heard from, Bill Doherty, as Catherine mentioned, Bill's co-founder of Braver Angels, which helps people bridge political differences through things like workshops and debates. Bill told me there are a lot of dynamics feeding polarization today. For one thing, there's the media we consume.
Polarization started to rise dramatically about 40 years ago in this country, but social media just accelerated it. Other things are so many media outlets that kind of specialize politically, people getting their news feeds to fit their already existing biases. So we live in a different information universe now from one another.
And, you know, people are certainly louder than ever on social media, it seems. But I'm curious to know, is it harder to get people to want to have conversations across political differences in this current environment, maybe face-to-face?
I think it is harder now. What we call blues, people more liberal, have always been more interested in these conversations than reds. But there are a number of blues now who are having a crisis of confidence, if you will, in trying to reach out across the divide. So that's a shift since the last election. But the thing is, people can't get to Trump himself or any political leader, but they can get to their friends and family. And this is, I think, really troubling to me.
Braver Angels does work across the country. When people are showing up, are they showing up alone and talking with people they don't know? Or are you seeing people show up as families and saying, help us? Because it can be more difficult, right, to have these types of conversations with the people closest to us.
They don't show up as families.
Okay, that's wishful thinking. Maybe.
That's wishful thinking. Uncle Fred, would you like to come to this thing with me? though they come as individuals, so we have a workshop called Families and Politics, and people come as individuals, and they learn to deal better with people who we call the family gladiator, or the defender or the sniper or whatever. We have a little humor with this. And so how do you bring yourself differently? And so part of what we teach people is don't try to change them, but, protect your boundaries. And then if you want to engage, how do you engage? Because behind every passionate political belief, there's a story. If you can get to the story, it humanizes the person for you.
John A. Powell has thought a lot about this phenomenon. He's director of the Othering and Belonging Institute. It's at the University of California, Berkeley. And Powell says the stories we tell about each other really matter. Some of those stories are what he calls breaking stories, which demonize other people.
You're putting some people into a category to say they're less than, they don't fully belong, they don't count, they don't matter as much. Maybe they're not even people. The way you do that is through something called breaking. And breaking, like the term suggests, is a practice where you tell stories, you reduce people to single dimensions. All of us are complex. It's like the only thing I care about this person is that they're a Hindu or that they're black or that they're white. I'm not interested in what their aspirations are. And so we engage in practices and stories about the other. And those stories are denigrating.
Powell says the opposite of breaking stories are bridging stories.
We can't actually engage that person, that group, to listen to them, to hear them, to engage in what's called empathetic listening. And we find when we do that we can connect with them. We have more in common than we have difference, and that's called bridging. The research suggests that when you really bridge with someone, the possibility of them changing and your changing goes up exponentially. So it's actually much more effective in terms of moving people. But if the purpose of bridging is to move people, it's not really bridging in a deep way. But when you really see someone, something happens.
It might be hard to imagine people having bridging conversations around a topic as contentious as abortion. For some people, reproductive rights are absolute. For others, the sanctity of life is absolute. So how do you find common ground? Annie Baxter has that story.
Kayla Myers distinctly remembers the chaos of growing up in Pennsylvania alongside lots of cousins, specifically girl cousins.
It's just like a big, noisy family. And so Christmas was always just all of us in Grandma and Pop's basement and just like wrapping paper chaos.
Like her cousins, Kayla was a pretty devout Catholic. She went to Mass regularly and took part in the March for Life. That's the annual anti-abortion rights march in Washington, D.C. But by college, Kayla was having doubts about everything.
In some ways, my relationship with my views on abortion has evolved completely in tandem with my relationship with organized religion. And so I think when one shook, the other shook inherently.
Kayla came to believe that the decision about whether to end a pregnancy should be up to a woman and her doctor. And one particular statistic really shaped her view. 6 in 10 women seeking abortions have had at least one other child, so there are likely other children at home. That really resonated with her when she became a mom herself and suffered from postpartum depression.
I now know that it's just so complex. It's such a difficult thing. It is very, very hard to navigate being pregnant, having children, and being postpartum.
Kayla now lives in a Minneapolis suburb and fully supports abortion rights. On paper, at least, this puts her at odds with one of those girl cousins she was so tight with growing up, Tori LaBelle. Here's Tori.
My pro-life opinion is that regardless of a woman's situation or any prenatal diagnosis, that every person has dignity at the moment of fertilization, and the gift of life deserves to be protected.
Tori learned that she and her cousin Kayla were no longer seeing things the same way about a decade ago. It was Christmas, the usual raucous scene at the grandparents' house. And that year, some of the girl cousins' gifts to each other were donations to a favorite charity. Tori opened her envelope, and she saw that Kayla had donated to Planned Parenthood in all of our cousins' names.
And I was like, okay, this is how I know. Meanwhile, I'm studying religion at a Catholic university, and I'm sure there could have been plenty of other people in our family that could have blew up Christmas and it be ruined. But, Kayla and I have a relationship that's not built on that.
Tori lives in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. And unlike Kayla, who's moved away from the Catholic Church, Tori has leaned in. She's the director of family ministry at a Catholic church.
Everyone in Louisiana, the number one question is where you go to church. Who's your mama? Who's your daddy? Where do you go to church? That's classic.
And opposition to abortion is a big part of life there, too. Tori takes high school students to the March for Life, and she's participated in prayer vigils outside abortion clinics. Tori says she and her cousin look like they're on opposite sides of this issue, but what keeps them connected is all the places where they overlap.
Kayla and I completely agree. We look at a woman in a crisis pregnancy and who's thinking of choosing abortion, and we're saying, I am so sorry you're in this spot. I wish you could be in a spot where taking on kids was a joy and you had community support and support from your family and support from society and your government, and you were able to afford all those things.
Like Kayla, Tori says having children herself deepened her sense of empathy for women who already have kids and are considering abortion. She says those women get the kind of selflessness parenting requires.
Anybody who's had to wake up at 2 a.m. and then 2:15 and then 2:20, yes, you are dying to yourself for your child. You're saying, what I want right now or what I need, physical need, sleep, is being denied to care for this child. And to know that there are mothers who have done that and say, I can't sacrifice anymore, that hurts so bad, because it's not because women are selfish that they choose abortion. It's not. They are backed into a corner.
Tori and Kayla talk about these issues a lot. They regularly check in with each other, especially when they know that a news development could be hard on the other person. That happened when the Supreme Court overturned Roe versus Wade in 2022. Tori, the abortion opponent in Louisiana, was relieved. Kayla, the Minnesotan who supports abortion rights, was gutted. But they leaned on each other to talk about what needed to come next. Here's Tori again.
Affordable health care, affordable child care, paid parental leave for mothers and fathers, lots of government programs, but also nonprofit support too. It needs to be community and the state, and I'll take federal level, involvement in this support here.
Hearing Tori say, I hear the responsibility that comes with this Supreme Court decision, because there's about to be babies in this world. They are going to be born in situations where parents would have said, I can't have a child in this moment. And so I appreciated that, someone was seeing it, because it, comes back to remembering that this isn't a sport. This disagreement isn't sport. It's not Vikings-Packers. It is people's lives.
Both cousins say the way abortion gets talked about politically washes over a lot of nuance and pits people against each other. They reject that frame. Here's Kayla again.
For me personally, having been someone who was mourning the lives of the unborn, I can hold a lot of compassion for that feeling. Whether you're mourning the loss of life in utero, or you're mourning the loss of life for people who are seeking reproductive care, or you're mourning the loss of choice for people who are seeking care and seeking, a say in their lives. It's a hard, devastating topic. And I think always coming back to that and saying, you're sad. You're sad. I'm sad. We're sad. And we're not going to unsad this.
But Kayla says she and her cousin are trying to figure out how to get through it together.
That's reporter Annie Baxter. This is Americans Reconnect, talking across the political divide. I'm Nina Moyni. Later this hour, we'll hear from people who are trying to make big changes in their communities by bridging differences. But first, we have one more story about what that looks like in a family relationship, where there's often an expectation that other family members will share the same views and values. That was the case for John Curley and his daughter Robin. The two of them have a close relationship. They love playing music together.
All the changes we've been through this long year.
But there was a period when things were less harmonious between them. It started when Robin sent her dad an email telling him she's gay. Her dad is a conservative Christian. Catherine Richards sat down with the Curleys, and they explained the turn that their relationship took after that life-changing note.
So, John, I want to know what your reaction was when you got that email and what's happening in your head at this point.
I was deeply hurt. And I went through all of the periods of grief. There was denial, bargaining, anger. And I remember taking a long walk down on the river and just crying out and crying bitterly over this. I was raised in the Presbyterian Church, family of 4 boys. My brother Paul would always chide me and mock me as a Sterling, Colorado, Logan County Presbyterian, conservative, Republican, Rotarian businessman. You know,
you pretty much check all the boxes there.
And he was heckling me, and we would laugh about that and stuff. But it was drastically different. So what I was doing in my framework, trying to understand, was thinking, you know what? Because this is what you've been exposed to, Robin, in the schools. This is what you're being exposed to with other friends when you're doing canvassing for NARAL and different things like that. You're exposed to this radical philosophy. So what you are doing is making a choice. Mm. And I did not accept the fact that that's the way Robin was created.
So then Dad and I did get together in person. So we got Thai takeout thinking, okay, this is a conversation that would be best had privately, not in a restaurant. And we, to my memory, the takeout sat untouched on the dashboard of your car, and we drove to the end of Summit Avenue. There's like a little park there. Mm-hmm. I think we were in that car for 6 hours talking. That's about the time, because we went late into the evening, and it was just this searing, emotional, intense, tearful conversation. In the midst of it, you know, it's 11 o'clock at night. The park is closed. It's dark. And this knock comes on the window. And it's a police officer. And Dad rolls down the window, and as he does is, you know, very deferential to the police officer. And, oh, sir, I'm just having a conversation with my daughter. And the police officer looks over at me, and I am not a pretty crier. My eyes are puffy and red, and I am just clearly, visibly very upset. And he just looks over and he's like, ma'am, are you okay? And I'm like,
there's so much.
I mean, am I okay? No. Is it something you can help me with? No. You just happened to stumble onto maybe the most painful conversation of my life. Welcome.
In that conversation, does anything stand out to you as something that was really hard to hear, or something that was sort of a relief to hear?
After leaving that conversation, I think I did feel a sense of relief. He wasn't saying, I'm going to support you no matter what. You know, he was definitely voicing his concerns, his biblical beliefs that this was not condoned by God. But he also, my sense from him is that he was trying to understand. He was sharing, but he was also asking questions, and he was approaching that conversation with at least a sense of curiosity.
When did you start to accept?
It was before you and Abby married.
Okay.
But I think that was eminent. Okay. I'm an active Rotarian, and one of the traditions in Rotary is that we have happy finds. So you stand up and you share something that you're happy about, a family event, a grandchild, an achievement. But it's not always happy. Sometimes there are difficult things that you're struggling through. I stood up to pay a happy fine. And I said to the club, and these are dear friends, I said, it's hard for me to stand up and do this because what I am about to tell you, I'm afraid that you'll vote me off the island. But here's the deal. My daughter, Robin, is gay. And initially, I did not accept that. It was a tragic thing for me to be confronted with that, and I rejected it. But over time, working through this with Robin, not only did I come to accept it, I came to embrace it, that this is who Robin is. So that's my story, and that's my fight. Standing O. Maybe not a standing O, but certainly a hearty ovation.
It just makes me really grateful that my dad has been a person who has been willing to evolve and has prioritized. I think at the end of the day, what happened is you prioritized our relationship over any ideology.
I'm wondering if your worldview had to be challenged and reframed a little bit to sort of continue to trust your dad and accept him into your life while he is going through all of this?
Well, I think actually, alongside of all of this coming out is that I had left the church. I was no longer identifying as a Christian. That just that was not sitting right. And I think that has also been really hard for Dad because our church was so, and our faith was so important. And really for a long time was one of the things that Dad and I shared and had in common. And so I think that was also really painful for him. And for me, then I had to get to a place where I could move past some of the anger and hurt that I felt around the church and be able to accept that is a part of his spiritual life and spiritual journey that is really important to him and to honor and celebrate that for him, even though it's different for me.
Now there's warm sunshine raining all around. Sunshine is raining all around, my friend.
That's Catherine Richard talking with Robin Curley and her dad, John. I'm Nina Moyni. Coming up, what does it look like when communities reckon with race and policing or the war in Gaza? We'll talk to some folks who are trying to do just that. That's next on Americans Reconnect, talking across the political divide. First, a quick break.
This is WMNF Tampa.
Tampa's wildest music party is back. WMNF's Tropical Heatwave brings an explosion of sound to Ybor City on May 10th. Multiple stages, endless genres, one unforgettable night. Tickets at tropicalheatwave.org.
8 p.m., this is Americans Reconnect, talking across the political divide. I'm your host, Nina Moyni. So far this hour, we've heard how different families are trying to keep their relationships intact despite big differences around political and social issues. Next, we'll hear from folks who are trying to do that bridging work at a community level, for instance, around policing. Across the U.S., police-involved shootings of Black men have been a flashpoint and sparked riots. One of the most notable examples took place in Minneapolis, where a Black man, George Floyd, died at the hands of police officer Derek Chauvin. Floyd's murder ignited protests here and around the world. Floyd's murder also deepened the fault lines between the Minneapolis police and Black residents. So it might be surprising that a group of Minneapolis police officers has been meeting regularly with Black community members to try to improve their relationships. And they've been doing this for 8 years. And it's maybe even more surprising that this group has traveled together a couple times now to Montgomery, Alabama. It's a city that has a long, painful history spanning slavery and the civil rights movement. My colleague Angela Davis traveled with the group on their most recent trip. She's here to tell me about her reporting. Hi, Angela.
Hey, Nina.
Okay, so the name of the group you traveled with is the Police and Black Men Project. And who all from the group was on the trip?
Well, there were 6 white Minneapolis police officers, 1 Black officer, and about 10 community members, all Black men, all of them interested in public safety. But it was very interesting, a wide variety of personal backgrounds. Some of these men were community members who lead nonprofits. One works for the city of Minneapolis. A couple of the men are formerly incarcerated.
And what was the goal of the trip?
The overarching goal, I think, would to describe it would be to try to connect the past to the present, to get a better understanding of this, again, this deep distrust that law enforcement officers are dealing with today when it comes to some members of the Black communities that they serve, who they are interacting with during their patrols and who they're in conversation with when they are responding to calls or maybe just daily interactions. Here's how Minneapolis Police Inspector Charlie Adams puts it.
I think we need to come down and see what history is about, right? From my perspective, I want my officers to understand what enslaved people went through, right? When a Black person come up to you and say, hey, you know, law enforcement, policing is a remnant of slavery, I want them to understand what folks mean when they say that. And that's why I think it's important to bring officers down so they can see what's been going on, you know, in the past.
Sergeant George Warzenik is an officer in Minneapolis' 4th Precinct. He is also part of the leadership of the Police and Black Men Project. And Sergeant Warzenik says the trip to Montgomery is valuable because it helps the group address its collective history, which includes slavery and the mass incarceration of Black men.
We can't cover it up. We can't ignore it. And the best way to heal some of those wounds is just simply to acknowledge it and accept it. It's very easy to get defensive because you feel like, oh, that's my country. And you have to just accept it, that it happened and it was wrong. And so this helps connect a lot of dots in my head and helps me to serve the community.
And Angela, tell me about the information and history you took in during this trip and how the people in the group responded to it, yourself included.
One of the key sites we visited was the Legacy Museum. Many people have heard of the Legacy Museum. It's gotten a lot of national attention. And it stands out because it is a fully immersive experience. The way that they use photos, video, art, sculptures that really illustrate what enslaved people endured. When you first enter the Legacy Museum, you are in this room, a dark space. You are on the floor of the ocean. It's dark. You're hearing the waves of the ocean. And as you walk through, you're seeing these sculptures that show enslaved people on the bottom of the ocean. Some are wearing spiked iron punishment collars and other hideous, dehumanizing devices. Many of these enslaved people died from illness because of the conditions during this long journey across the Atlantic Ocean. Their bodies were thrown overboard. Others drowned after they were thrown off of ships for different reasons. And again, you're seeing these facial expressions showing their anguish. And it's like you are there with them. And it really illustrates what it was like for an enslaved person. And it can truly be overwhelming. After walking through the museum, we sat down in these small groups after we had lunch in the cafeteria there at the Legacy Museum for an opportunity to discuss what we had all just experienced as a group. This is Charles Adams. We heard from his dad, Inspector Adams, earlier. Charles is a former Minneapolis police officer and now heads up team security for the Minnesota Twins. Here he is reflecting on an exhibit showing a Black person getting lynched.
They did a really good job of painting a picture of like how Black people were portrayed as beings. Like we just a doll, or we treat us like we're a doll. Did you guys remember that part when he said they were keeping him alive so that he could be lynched? Keeping him alive, giving him the best possible care or doing whatever it takes so that he's alive to be presented in that public spectacle. Like it's a show. Like it's a circus. Food vendors, concessions, yeah.
Minneapolis police officer Richard Hand was also shocked to see human beings treated like objects.
They have like a description of the particular slave to be sold. They would say this specific person, this approximate age, where they're from, what their skills are. It's almost like they're selling a car for tourists or something. You know, it's just, it's property. It's not a person.
That all sounds really emotionally intense, Angela.
It was. And one of the things that came up a lot was how law enforcement officers were involved in maintaining the system of slavery. A number of historians make the argument that aspects of modern policing have roots in the slave patrols in the South. The mission of those patrols was to squash slave uprisings and apprehend runaway slaves, among other things. That legacy informs the Black experience of being policed in many ways. Now, one of the community members on the trip, Damian Winfield, had some observations along those lines. It was about the role of police in one of the museum exhibits. Damian is active in a Minneapolis program called the Father Project. It supports fathers in economically challenged families. He was really struck by an account of a Black man in jail and a white mob on its way to lynch him.
The mob is surrounding the jail. The mob is inside the jail now, and the mob is taking the prisoner out the jail without a fight from the police. The police always seem to not be able to control the crowd, right? What I'm saying is like, but they can always control the big Black crowd, but they can never control the white mob crowd.
So, Angela, how do you think being on the trip together shaped the experience?
Well, I think because everybody was listening and learning together at the same time, experiencing it simultaneously, that played a big role in how it was all received. You know, traveling together is totally different than just sitting down as a group to have a structured conversation. Everybody on the trip was sharing an experience that they could then reflect on, and again, all at the same time. And I talked about all of this, the way that this trip was structured, with Bill Doherty. He is a therapist and the co-founder of the Police and Black Men Project.
And our listeners have heard from Bill a few times this hour. He's also co-founder of the national organization Braver Angels, which works in the depolarizing space.
That's right. And here's what Bill had to say about why it's valuable to do a group trip like the Montgomery one.
Everybody was having light bulbs go off. Because part of my whole thing about interracial communication, it doesn't work if somebody is there setting out to enlighten you, right? Mm-hmm. People, recoil against that. A lot of what people say we need a conversation about race is not really a conversation, because it sets up Black people to inform white people about the Black experience. And white people don't get to say much, except to, say thank you or to resist, right? Mm-hmm. But we're doing it together. We're having this experience together.
You're witnessing it at the same time.
And everybody's learning.
What do you think that the officers and community members did learn from each other, Angela?
I think that there's this realization that we all have a lot to learn about history, whether you're Black or white. Everybody can learn more. And what comes up with that knowledge is that, that this wisdom, it can be greatly impactful in terms of how you respond to people and situations today. The more you know can really inform how you talk and interact with people around you. And even, just like body language and eye contact, you can have more empathy. And also, I think that there was the shared knowledge and just the reality that a police officer's uniform, the sight of a uniform and the badge, that it carries with it a very painful past. So that uniform can trigger a lot of emotion.
It sounds like there were really healthy exchanges happening on this trip. What about the police officers who didn't go on the trip?
That is a great question, and one that I was eager to ask some of the leaders on the trip. I did ask that question when I sat down with Minneapolis Police Inspector Charlie Adams. He, again, is with the 4th Precinct.
I think the ones that's here now can go back and say, hey, I can use this when I'm out dealing with community. I can understand when somebody comes to me angry about, the past. I understand the past wounds, right? Instead of being reactive and telling somebody, yeah, I had nothing to do with that. So I just think it's another tool in their belt. But for the ones who just like, I don't want nothing to do with it, well, you're going to probably have a struggle if some issues coming up, especially when it comes to community, especially the Black community. If you don't understand why they're upset, then you're going to have a problem.
Is there any one thing you took away from the trip that really resonated with you personally?
It is encouraging to see that people of vastly different backgrounds really can sit down together and have civil conversations, listen and learn, but in the right environment and where you have some coaching and definitely some clearly defined boundaries. And, we all have more in common than we think. If we do sit down together, particularly next to each other, have a meal together, and when we're not in crisis, to simply talk to one another, we can connect and form more healthy relationships. And so I definitely did walk away, both as a reporter, as a Black woman as well, with a sense of hope and optimism that things can really improve. A police department is just that. It's a department. It is made up of individuals. And many of those individuals, those individual men that I spent time with, I feel really are sincerely trying to learn how to do their jobs better and earn the community's trust.
Angela, thank you for being with us and thank you for your work.
You're so welcome.
That's Minnesota Public Radio News host Angela Davis talking about her reporting trip to Montgomery, Alabama with the Police and Black Men Project. This is Americans Reconnect, talking across the political divide. I'm your host, Nina Moini. When Hamas attacked Israel on October 7th, 2023, Israel retaliated. The conflict has caused massive suffering in the region. Here in the U.S., Palestinian Americans and Jewish people have grieved the loss of life. And in our last story this hour, we'll hear from 4 people from those communities who are trying to promote empathy and dialogue with each other, even when it feels impossible. Catherine Richard has the story.
In the fall of 2023, Munir Rafai was watching with horror as the war between Israel and Hamas began.
My family is Palestinian. They come from modern-day Safed, Israel, which is 10, 15 miles south of the border with Lebanon.
Munir has been in the United States for 25 years, since college, and he wanted to do something to help people in his town understand what was happening to the Palestinian people. He now sees it as a genocide with tens of thousands of Palestinians dead. He decided a dialogue with a Jewish person would be the best way to talk about the war.
There are many, many more moderates, just everyday people that just don't want this to happen. Right. But I don't think their voices are being heard. This conflict, no one's going to win. I think the only way through is together.
So he teamed up with Rabbi Jill Avron. She was already involved in efforts to reduce Islamophobia and anti-Semitism. She also thought that dialogue would be valuable, so the two of them started planning a public event.
So in some ways, I think that the work we're doing is in that spirit of not staying silent and coming together when really society is encouraging us to remain in our little insular communities.
Of course, neither Jill nor Munir speak for everyone in their communities, and some people on both sides think their dialogue efforts are a waste of time. But they had good turnout at their first event. It was in December of 2023, just months after Hamas attacked Israel, and Israel started bombing Gaza. Jill and Munir talked with the audience about how the conflict was affecting their communities. They also talked about the long history behind the conflict. There were dozens of people there, some Jewish, some Arab. It also drew a lot of people who just wanted to know more about the situation.
In my talk, I spoke about my understanding and empathy to the Jewish people, to their plight, to their historic suffering and pain. But then I switch gears to saying, but that doesn't justify what's happening to the Palestinian people as well.
The night did end with some tension. Munir's wife, Emma, was at the event too. She's a Midwesterner, not Palestinian American, and she tends to be even more outspoken about the Palestinian cause than her husband.
I guess I generously like to think of myself as an ally to the Palestinian issue.
At the end of the night, a Jewish attendee named Steve Lear approached Munir and Emma and got into an argument with them.
Emma yelled at me for not being sensitive enough to the Palestinian plight. I yelled at her, then I walked away, and then I called Munir, and he appreciated my frankness with his frank wife. And then I decided, no, this is a person that I really would like to kind of get to know, because I call him a fanatical moderate, and she and I are a little bit on the fanatical side, and I thought that the four of us could actually create an environment where fanatical moderation could exist.
Since that rocky start, Steve is now friends with Munir and Emma. The three of them meet regularly with Rabbi Jill too, sometimes for coffee, sometimes for Chinese food. They hash out the latest news about Israel's ongoing war in Gaza.
Thank you.
On a warm day last March, Munir, Emma, Steve, and Jill gathered at Jill's house for a lunch marking a Jewish holiday.
Today is Purim. So I'm just making the dessert, which is hamantashen.
As they sit down to a meal of fresh pita, hummus, marinated chicken, and rice pilaf, Jill pours the wine.
There is a tradition to drink, and the idea is that you're supposed to drink enough that you can't distinguish between the good guy and the bad guy.
As they eat, the group talks about lighter things, the delicious food, upcoming travel, their kids. Munir and Emma recently attended the bat mitzvah of Jill's daughter. They joke about how awkward it was to pull up to a synagogue with a Free Palestine bumper sticker on their car. But it doesn't take long before Steve and Munir's wife Emma get into an argument. It still happens a lot between the two of them. Steve expresses fears that Hamas will destroy the Jewish people if given the chance. For him, that justifies Israel's mission to defend itself.
So if Hamas came back into power, how would Israelis...
Which they will.
Well, how will Israelis trust that Hamas has totally shifted its mindset away from the destruction of the Jewish people? We've been there. I'm sorry, the Palestinians have never been out to be destroyed. And you have been...
50,000 of them would argue with you.
Well, yeah, they would.
If they had voices but still.
Emma, I can go back and say the 6 million people...
The Palestinians are not responsible for the Holocaust.
Okay.
My people were.
The world, yes.
And I can admit that.
The world was responsible.
No,
for the
Palestinians had nothing to do with the Holocaust.
And trust me, I know how painful that experience.
The Holocaust was a modern program committed by white Europeans against their Jewish neighbors. It's inexcusable, but it is not the responsibility of a Palestinian.
Munir Rafai interjects.
And that's, I think, the premise of our dialogue is I empathize, and it breaks my heart to know this historical, painful experience, but it doesn't justify what's happening today, and it shouldn't. And I hope you agree that it shouldn't, right?
What's the solution?
Right.
What should we do?
What can these four do, thousands of miles away from the conflict? There are no easy answers at today's lunch, but Rabbi Jill hopes that what they're doing could have some impact.
I know that's really lofty and people might say that's really naive, but I also think that, this is how movements work, right? Like if there are enough movements like ours locally and around the country, and the more pressure that is felt in the international community, I think that those things really do make a difference.
Have a safe flight.
It's late afternoon by now. Everyone is full, and despite their arguing, everyone leaves feeling grateful for each other. They hug, they say goodbye, and pledge to keep talking, even when it's painful.
That's reporter Catherine Richer. You've been listening to Americans Reconnect, talking across the political divide, a broadcast special from APM. This program was written and produced by Catherine Richard and Annie Baxter. Annie edited the show with help from Lorna Benson. We had technical assistance from Alex Simpson, Gene Barron, Josh Savageau, and Derek Ramirez. Jane Helmke is the executive editor of Minnesota Public Radio News. If you'd like to learn more about Talking Sense, our reporting initiative on depolarization, go to nprnews.org/Talking Sense. I'm Nina Moyni. Thanks for listening.
This is
APM, American Public Media.
This is WMNF Tampa. And thanks for listening to Americans Reconnect. Coming up next is the NPR News, followed by a speech by Heather Cox Richardson from the Alternative Radio series. She'll be talking about cowboy authoritarianism in America. Then at noon is Wide Awake America with Nadine Smith, talking about the disinformation war against democracy.